From taking over boxing to an on-screen Godfather, promoter Eddie Hearn took time out from playing Mafia Definitive Edition to speak to Mirror Fighting, and I asked him whether he'd make a good gangster in real life.
No, because you got to have plenty of bottom. I'm probably an old, big girl's blouse, but I think it was kind of like standard. There's a lot of standard sort of family gangster stuff in there, like when he sits down with, hey, you talk about the old traditional story of just a man on the street, cab driver, who finds himself immersed in this gangster lifestyle and sort of actually quite enjoys it. And then he's welcomed by the family, with the suits and the spats and the meatballs. And, so listen, I think it's, we all grew up watching those films. And it felt like a kind of modern day remake of Bugsy Malone, but like a adult version. And that was one of my favourite films, actually. I used to love that as a kid.
Who do you think is the Godfather of boxing?
Well, I'm the Godfather of boxing. I mean, they call Bob Arum the Godfather of boxing, but come on, Martin, I'm really the Godfather of boxing. But I think I haven't got that. Sometimes if you've got white hair, right, or you've been around for years and years, you do have that aura about you, of knowledge, and you can sit there and people will just listen for hours and hours. And sometimes I'll bring a fighter in, and I'll take him to meet my old man just to say hello. And 20 minutes later, he's telling a story about, I don't know, Eubank or Naz or Lennox Lewis. And they're just like, I think, how many times have I heard this story? And that's basically what the old promoters do. Arum, Warren, my old man, they just regurgitate stories. Do you know what I mean? But they've got some incredible stories. So I guess Godfather really relates to the older generation, I think. So maybe Arum's the Godfather. Do you know what I mean? But I'm like the new kid on the scene. And, every now and again, that Godfather sort of loses the patch, if you like. And that's what I think is happening in boxing.
Can you see yourself doing this at 80?
No. I mean, listen, when you love something so much, it's not like I wake up every day and think, I can't do this anymore. Or very fortunate to be involved in a job or sport that I love very much. And I feel like I wouldn't enjoy my life as much if I wasn't doing it. And it's a bit like my old man, really. He's saying now, I've got to sort of step back a little bit from the business. And although he doesn't really do too much boxing, but if you enjoy it so much and you're sharp and you're fresh and you're healthy, why would you want to do anything else? So right now, I'm as passionate as I've ever been about boxing. Actually, just come out of a meeting there, and I think with all the lockdown stuff, I'm probably more motivated than I've ever been. I'm actually finding it quite fun in a really sick way, of just all these doors just keep on closing on you, and it's like, we're not really had to experience this before, but it's a challenge of doing something different or trying to get fights over the line that people thought you couldn't get over the line, or trying to create a different kind of TV format and content that you didn't previously do. So I kind of feel like what we're learning now is going to help us a lot when we return to full crowds, because we're having to really invest in the promotion, the hype, the content. And I'm enjoying it. I'm not saying we got lazy before, but it does give you a kick up the arse when something like this happens, and you have to just go above and beyond. And Fight Camp was a great start, brilliant example of that. And now we move into the next phase, which was supposed to be the phase of crowds returning, but is more like now he's trying to create a schedule that looks very similar to a schedule that would have been in place with crowds. And that's a real challenge, because obviously the revenue changes considerably. It's water, by the way, not wine.
I believe you. Just sticking slightly with this idea of taking over, the mafia, and if we can apply it to boxing, I know you said the other day that you're doing your best to have an undisputed champion in each of the women's divisions because it's a bit easier, and I imagine it's a bit cheaper as well because it's so hard to do with the men. But let's imagine that was your goal, however long it was going to take, however much it was going to cost. Is it better and I know there's a lot of talk about you working with promoters at the moment, to work with promoters? Or would it be better if one promoter ran the whole show? And maybe during this COVID crisis, in 6 months' time, we don't know how many promoters there will be if some have financial difficulties. Would it be better to be just one man who controlled boxing?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think you know my answer to that, but, knowing me like you do. But for me, the only way that I can get the sport of boxing to where I really want it to be, and that's from a fan's perspective, and people sometimes forget, yes, I am aggressive in what I do. Yes, I do have an ego. Yes, we like to make money, but I am a massive boxing fan. Like, I know everything about the sport, from the fighters to the trainers, to the governing bodies, to the rankings, to the fights, to the history. I've been around this sport for 32 years, right? The only way it can get to where I want it to be, and that is as one of the major sports in the world. And it is, don't get me wrong, the sport has global appeal, but is to make the best consistently. And the only way that you're going to do that is to either, and this goes back to your question, number one, have all the promoters work more together, or two, have almost like a universal business or governing body or whatever it is that controls the sport. And that's my aim. My aim is to be that individual. My aim is to be the UFC of boxing. It's the only way. I'm not saying that, this is what I'm going to do, but this is what I want to do. And this is the only way I can see it getting to the levels of where I want it to be. If it doesn't happen, boxing's not dead. Boxing's not in a bad place. I think boxing's in a good place. But I just feel like, but the only way that happens is to either, it is really one way mainly, but another one of your points was a good one. One was let nature take its course, right? And COVID might speed that process up for you. And by nature taking its course, I mean keep being successful and expanding the business and growing the business to a point where you are unquestionably the market leader and everybody else is, quite frankly, not, a player. But with the COVID and the changes to the economy, that's going to happen naturally as well, because the companies that are in good shape, the companies that have good liquidity, the companies that have been running a profitable and solid business over the years will survive this 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, God knows how long it's going to be. The others that were struggling to run a business without liquidity or without that solid foundation are done, really, in boxing. So you're going to see a lot of promotional companies fall by the wayside, and you're going to see a lot of businesses fall by the wayside. And the other way to do it is to speed that process up and buy all the other companies that are out there, or the companies that you need to buy, if that makes sense, And the only way you do that really is with significant investment, which is quite frankly there if you want it. But it is a big job, and it does involve speaking to people who have a huge amount of ego and pride, and do they want to leave the sport? But this is probably the time to do it, to be honest with you. If you're looking to buy a company or take over a business in this kind of market, this is your best time to strike, really. Because I think a lot of businesses will be looking at the future and the landscape thinking, fucking hell, where are we going? So, I don't know. It's just a little pipe dream of mine. And actually, before COVID, we were expanding into another 5 territories with offices, and we were making a big global move, which we will do in 2021, but it's definitely on the back seat right now as we look to just confirm our international schedule for the coming months. And that's really the priority.
One of the issues, of course, is we have 4 governing bodies, or 4 sanctioning bodies, and therefore often 4 champions. I wonder, and it's sort of, maybe let's take Anthony Joshua as an example. You say he really wants to be the undisputed world champion, but right now there's no clear best in the world. I think probably most people would say Tyson Fury, but Anthony would disagree, maybe yourself as well. what is more important to fighters generally, being recognised as the best in the world or having all the belts? I don't think they're all I don't think it's necessarily the same thing.
They like it if both can come hand in hand.
Sure.
It's another good question. I think it's a conversation of, if belts are steeped in history, and when you're a young fighter, you have heroes, and you remember those heroes holding the green and gold WBC belt or, that red IBF belt. And, you remember them being undisputed and standing there with all the belts, and the Ring Magazine belt as well, has a lot of pull with fighters. And that's another question, when you talk about going to a sort of universal business in boxing, do you create your own governing body? And how long does it take for that governing body or that belt to be recognized as the belt in boxing? It's very difficult to just start up a belt and expect it to have the same credibility and legacy that the WBC belt would have, for example. So I'm one of those, when people talk about we need to get rid of the governing bodies and just have one universal belt, I'm not so much geared on that idea, to be honest with you, because fighters want to win belts. They want to win those world championships. AJ, for example, wants to be undisputed, but he also wants to be known as the best heavyweight in the world. But I think sometimes you get to a position in a fight, and this is the big debate at the moment, isn't it? Oh, Usyk, AJ, and just vacate the WBO belt. And I keep saying to people that we would not let a belt get in the way of AJ against Fury, but if we can keep them all, that is our absolute priority, because AJ wants to be undisputed champion. If AJ beats Tyson Fury, he's the best heavyweight in the world, bar none. But he's not the undisputed world heavyweight champion. And that matters to him, So I think the question is, would you rather be known as the best or have all the belts? The two should work in synergy with each other. They don't always, because in some divisions, the best fighter in the division, they don't even have a belt. Or might just have one belt and someone else has got 4 or whatever. So, but there's very few fights where you can say the clear cut. I mean, you look at the divisions, I think there will be no one that disagrees that the winner of AJ against Fury is the best heavyweight in the world. I think that's a given. Crawford against Spence. Again, you got Pacquiao, but really, that's the one, isn't it, to let you know which is the best in the world. But in a lot of divisions, there's arguments, isn't there? It might be, I don't know, the super middleweight division. Okay, Canelo, if Golovkin goes there, Callum, Billy Joe, Caleb Plant, Benavidez. It's very sometimes difficult to have a clear-cut number one. But certainly in that division, in heavyweight division, regardless of the belts, the winner is the clear-cut number one.